Yeah, I'm much more like on the line of like velour or velvet. I cannot touch anything with a rake. Cannot touch my skin.
Me either. Yeah, no thank you.
I can't do it.
Welcome. You are entering a strange realm. A realm of what ifs. What if movies, television shows, and video games were better, worse, bizarrer, or downright different? What might they look like? Find out on today's episode of CineCasters.
Welcome back to the CineCasters, the show where we watch movies, deconstruct them, and reconstruct them in order to talk about them and dissect their themes and then put them back together in a way that maybe is a bit more cohesive or at least makes us happy in some small way. My name is Janglez, and today I'm joined by Alyssa.
Hi.
Very small way, our small, infinite, like very insignificant lives. Where we watch movies that other people have made. Today we are looking at Inkheart.
Okay, so I've read the books.
Okay, did you reread it?
No.
Okay, because you had said you were gonna...
got rid of my copies.
Oh, okay. So when you say books, how many are in this series?
There are 3 books.
Oh, okay.
And
this is news to me.
This movie, somehow... I could be totally wrong. I might just be like totally misremembering this, but... This movie feels like they took the first half of the first book and the last half of the third book and just
put it together. Okay, because
yeah,
I didn't hate this movie. I wasn't aware that it was a series. I was under the impression that this was a singular book that had then been adapted into movie form. Mm-hmm. However, my biggest problem with this transition, this adaptation, is twofold. First, I'm fairly certain that the main character of the book is supposed to be Maggie.
Yep.
In this, she is a little bit more superfluous because the story isn't told from her perspective. She's just in it.
Yep.
Mo is far more the main character.
Mo and Dustfinger, I think.
Yeah, and I'll come back to that. The other problem that I have is that I think the reason this doesn't work in movie form is, aside from some hardcore plot failings and stuff like that, is because I think this is supposed to be a love letter to reading, like first and foremost. And I think the idea is the story is about reading and how that magically brings people or brings the things of the book to life. And metaphorically, the idea is like when you read, you bring these stories to life for yourself. You experience them. You travel. You go to those places. You become more empathetic. I've always been a big advocate for reading and how that can bring about empathy in people. But because you're reading the book, it's like that's all happening for you. There's like layers to the form. I feel like the author is really playing with the form of, as you read, that the whole story is coming to life for you, just as it is for Maggie and Mo.
Yep.
And I got that even while watching this. I was like, I get it. That's the point of this book. That is lost to some extent because we don't have Maggie's inner dialogue, even though I don't think it's told from first person. We don't have her. I'm pretty sure it's told from third person.
No, I'm pretty sure it's first person.
Oh, it's first person. Well, that changes things even more so because now we have Maggie's inner dialogue as she reads the book.
If it's not first person, it's close third. It's
got to be close third. That's generally how people write. First person's a little bit rarer. That's why I assumed it was third person close. But the point remains is when you watch this as a movie, if it is in fact first person, as a movie, I've talked about this before, you separate your perspective. The perspective is not from Maggie's point of view anymore. It's a third person showing her. We lose her dialogue. We lose her experience of the book. As we transition to a movie, we also lose the experience of reading, which is the point of this story. So I think, and we'll get into the plot and whatnot and characters in a second, but I really wanted at the outset to talk about why I think this is a bad book to adapt. Not because it's a bad story, but because I think there's a layer of like meta-ness to the story and the reading of the book that is lost when you tell the story in another format that isn't reading.
Yeah. Even just like an audiobook would be like a totally weird version of it because it's not fully the same experience.
Yeah, reading itself is an experience that requires kind of an active participation.
Yeah.
It's very different from almost any other art form. If you put a transient, we might call it a transient art form, like something that requires the passage of time. Not that reading doesn't, but what I mean is like music, audiobook, movie, all of these like require the movement through time, and you can put them on in the background and not pay attention to them, and still the art will occur. But if you pause music, if you pause a movie, if you pause an audiobook, they're no longer there anymore. Mm-hmm. You've stopped them. Now you could say like, oh, with a film, you still have a frame. Yeah, and you do. However, whatever frame you've stopped on is now only a single part of the movie. You're not experiencing the movie. You're experiencing that frame of the movie as an artwork unto itself, a singular frame as a piece of art. And there's something to be said for that too. That's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that when you read, you are forced to sit down and spend time interacting with the story being told. It's harder to read passively than it is to listen to an audiobook or stick a movie on in the background or have music on while you do something else. It's harder to experience literature and the written word passively and really understand the art in the same way. Not that you can listen to music passively and still get all the art out of it. That's, again, not the point I'm making.
Yeah.
It's just there is something that's required participation in order to experience. You know, you have to be cognizant almost fully and more than any other art form in order to get the written word as an art form.
Plus, I think that especially when reading novels like this, usually you do kind of get absorbed into it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole goal, right?
You can't really get absorbed into a movie quite as well because you're just watching things happen, which is, the same as like watching it's a personal experience for me, right? Because that's just how I spent most of my childhood was reading.
Yeah, I mean, so did I. I love reading, and I still spend a lot of my time reading. And you hope, I mean, I think every author hopes that at least one reader will become hyperly obsessed and overly engrossed in the story, in the world that they're trying to tell, and I certainly still experience that. It's not out yet because it'll be a classic, but my obsession with the adaptation of and the episode we did on The Host, right?
Yeah.
I was like, that would have made, I mean, there's certainly things that I find irritating about the book, but I was like, if somebody put me in charge of that adaptation, I would have made that happen. I would have made that so much better. And that'll come out eventually. We're just working our way through the back catalog. But, I think somebody thought that this was a really popular book and figured that they could make an entire movie series franchise out of it. And then a few things happened. One, nobody thought about how the transition from media would actually change the experience of reading, which is kind of the point of this book, I feel like. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe halfway through or at the beginning, they realized that the franchise couldn't hold itself and made a couple changes to it. Because that ending feels really rushed.
Yeah, like I said, I think they took the ending of the third book and smashed it right into the beginning of the first book.
Because
they're missing the whole middle.
Yeah, well, that ending feels really, really rushed and very convenient. Yeah, go on.
If I remember correctly, the middle book, they're actually like in the world of Inkheart.
Oh, they go into Inkheart.
Yeah.
So you're reading.
If I'm remembering correctly,
so
I might not be.
You as the reader are reading a book called Inkheart, of them being in the book, No,
so Inkheart is the first one where they're still like in our world.
Yeah, but the book's called Inkheart, right?
Inkspell. Oh, Inkspell is the one where they go into Inkheart.
Yeah.
And then Ink Death is the one where they're trying to summon the shadow.
But the book is still called Inkheart, right? The story in the story, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a reason why it's called Inkheart?
No, it's just an author just wrote it.
I know. Well, I mean, like, so I understand why Inkheart is the name of the book that we're reading, but I wonder the story in the story. It doesn't seem to be any reason why it would be called Inkheart. It seems to me, the way that I read this, was that the story was supposed to be like a Neil Gaiman-esque like fairy tale written by an author who wasn't necessarily like all that successful. Mm-hmm. At least what I got out of the movie. And there's sort of like this, Neil Gaiman-esque, but also this Tolkien-esque quality to the author where he's like very separate from reality, sort of lives in his own like fairy tale world, and is this professor kind of thing, and that the book itself is very like fairy tale quality. It has some of the hallmarks, the wayless woods, and the shadow, which is this primordial magical creature that metaphorically represents darkness and death, and that's very Tolkien.
Yeah. And
I felt like that was purposefully done. Like we were trying to create this like fantastical fairy tale that had a lot of elements of early fantasy storytelling, which doesn't really relate to the idea of Inkheart. Now, that being said, I haven't actually read Inkheart, the story within the story, so. And
also, I'm pretty sure they do talk about that at some point in the books. I just don't remember it. Yeah. Like, all of those details are like completely lost on me. There are some things that I do remember that I wish were added in. So one of the things that really bothered me was Dustfinger. Mm-hmm. Dustfinger?
Just singular finger.
Singular, okay. So I'm pretty sure his whole thing was that he always runs away, and then at one point when they're trying to convince the author that they need the manuscript, he comes back to be like, no, you don't get it. Like, I'm trying to get back into the book. Mm-hmm. He's the one that's kind of giving himself up, like, okay, I didn't want to talk to you because you're like gonna tell me how I die or something. Yeah. But I will take that chance if it means that I can get back. Yeah. And that they can get reunited with Riza or whatever. And then the other thing too was that Maggie was a little bit more of a badass in the books.
Yeah, she is very, very inconsequential until the very end. And then she's sort of just a plot device.
There were times where she was the main driver of ideas at one point in the books. And I think that's the whole idea, is like the author was originally in control of the books, and then he's almost like passing the torch on to her as a writer, mm-hmm. and giving her the space to use her ideas. I think like it's been so long since I read the books, but I remember it feeling so much more like important.
Yeah, I felt
like she had the pen at the end. Like,
there's a pen?
Yeah, don't you remember? She's writing on her arm.
Yeah, but does the pen matter? Does it matter what pen it is?
No.
Yeah, because that was one of the problems that I have. Yeah. I felt like the magic of authorship was really tenuous in this movie. Yeah. So, which is an interesting thing to come about right now with certain authors basically driving some of their franchises into the ground by adding stupid lore that is unnecessary via Twitter. Mm-hmm. If you know what I mean.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Yeah. One might say they're rowling in their grave. Anyway, not subtle, not clever. The idea of authorship and who controls what is canon and what isn't canon, I think, is something that could have been played with really, really cleverly in this movie. Not a word. In this movie, because when the author's like, oh, I'm going to start rewriting the end of the books and then have Maggie read it out loud, I was like, this brings about a lot of, like, what becomes canon then? Is it the script itself, the written word itself, or is it, the word of the author in terms of how things are interpreted? Because art is, by definition, subjective. It's experiential, right? So once you put something out into the world, certainly you may have a meaning or metaphor that you were trying to get across, but once it's out in the world, you don't get to decide how people read it. And we see this kind of like crazy thing happen all the time. You and I just went to go see Rage Against the Machine. Rage Against the Machine is like their lyrics and their ideology is very left politically, like very left. But there are a lot of people who it appeals to them who are much more right wing politically. And while I'm like, you guys didn't get the point, that's dismissive, right? I mean, the art is for everyone, and if it resonates with you, you don't get to decide, despite being the author, you don't get to decide how people interpret your art. Which I think is an interesting point of view, because if Maggie takes over being the author, that's really good for her arc, but it also speaks to, and I think we should have explored it more in the movie, speaks to how the art or the canon can change depending on who's in control and how we decide, like, you know, what is or isn't canon. Because there's easily a point there where Capricorn could have been like, you're not the author, you don't get to decide. Or this isn't in the original script, therefore it's not canon. Like, what constitutes the value, or, you know, what is written in stone, as it were, or, you know, paper in this case. I think that's an interesting concept.
I would also feel like, and you can correct me if this is like totally like not even remotely a good idea, but I also would feel like as soon as they are read out of the books and their story has changed from what's written, they are no longer part of the book.
I would agree with that.
So they can't be read back into the book, because you think about it, Dustfinger and Capricorn and all the other people have all been
so much.
They've changed so much ever since they were read out of the book. So why would they be able to return? They're not the same character anymore.
I sort of dealt with that in my version of the story, but or like in my pitch, but yeah, I think once you're no longer in the book, I think your character, I mean, that's the whole point of Dustfinger's plot. First of all, I'll get to this, but first of all, can we just talk about how Dustfinger is like actually the best character?
He is.
And easily should have been the main character. I think to follow Dustfinger and then all of a sudden, like, you know, around the 15 to 20 minute mark, find out that he's actually a character from a book who is like, you know, dealing with the fact that he doesn't belong in this world, and then his whole arc about not wanting to meet the author, that is so existential. And then I wanted him to like punch the author, be like, you're an asshole, like you made me this character that I don't agree with. Because you imagine meeting your actual god, like your actual god, right? The person who created you and made you 100% the way you are, and being like, I don't agree with the way that you made me. I don't like that I'm a coward. I don't want to be a coward. Now, we do get that a little bit, but it's not quite as like Nietzschean as I guess I would have wanted. Like, kill your gods. Yep. But there is an interesting moment where we have to talk about fate, the fate of Dustfinger. Because you say, you know, Dustfinger isn't the same character that he made. He's like, you know, and he says to the author, you wrote me as a coward. And the author is like, I disagree. Right? And in the end, the whole arc is that Dustfinger is supposed to be a coward, but then he comes back and saves Maggie, and in the end, he's a hero, and he does all this great stuff. How much of that is already written into his character?
Yeah.
Right? Is the arc that's happening in the real world, or I guess the world of the movie, reflecting what's happening in the world within the story that he was written to have?
Yeah.
Now, we know he obviously doesn't die in the end. Actually, we don't know that. We know he just doesn't die saving Gwyn.
Yeah.
But you know, how much of his arc, which feels good in the movie, is actually dictated by what happened in the book?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I don't know.
He is the best character.
It hurts my brain.
Such an interesting idea. It's such an interesting idea to have, like, what if your main character is actually the main character from the story, or a side character from the story?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, that's what Capricorn was. He was a henchman.
Yeah.
And suddenly he finds himself in this in this place of power, and suddenly he just goes crazy with the power, right?
Like, he has the opportunity to take it because he understands or can monger a kind of and rally a kind of force behind him. So and that is generally what happens when you have henchmen given absolute power.
Yeah.
You know? So there are some really, really excellent ideas in here. I really liked I really liked Dustfinger. I thought Paul Bettany does a great job as Dustfinger.
He does, yeah.
Man, that guy is so good in this and absolutely ripped. There was a couple times when he had his shirt off where I was like, it's hot in here, and I'm not talking about him playing with fire. Woo! Like,
oh my
he's
God.
an attractive man. So a couple of, like, we've talked about some of the things that were really good and where some of the problems are with this, but I do think there are some really like glaring issues with this, and unfortunately I hate to say it, but the biggest glaring issue for me is Brendan Fraser.
Yep.
He is I don't want to say bad, but very wooden. He is incredibly wooden. The dialogue is, his delivery is not great. I don't know. Was he American in the books? Is he supposed to be American?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't know if they ever like actually
gave him an accent
or anything. Same with Maggie and her mother.
Risa. Yeah. I liked Maggie being British and her mother being British. It didn't make sense to me. Like, there's no reason for Brendan Fraser to be American or British. It's never really come up. It's just, I would not have picked Brendan Fraser for this movie. Mm-hmm. It's not that he's a bad actor. It's just, I don't enjoy his portrayal in this movie. I don't know who I would have got to replace him given the option. I mean, there's like people who are always going to do a good job no matter what role you put them into. So like somebody around his, I mean, Jude Law, I just really like Jude Law. He would have been perfect. I don't know. Brendan Fraser was a big sore spot for me in this movie. And that was a little frustrating.
I couldn't really pin down why I wasn't enjoying Brendan Fraser's part in this movie, and I think it's just because I'm used to seeing him in a lot more like goofy
maybe like goofy
scenarios.
adventure roles,
like Tarzan. I remember him in that.
He wasn't Tarzan. He was George of the Jungle,
not Tarzan,
which is a Tarzan spoof, so yes.
Are we sure he wasn't? Who was Tarzan in the live action?
Which one? Do you know how many live actions there are?
There's more than one?
Oh my God, Tarzan has been adapted so many times.
The one from the 90s, I don't know.
The one from the 90s. I don't know that there was one in the 90s. I'm sure there was one in the 90s, but the one that I think you're thinking of is George of the Jungle, where Brendan Fraser plays George of the Jungle.
Maybe.
The only one that I can think of from the 90s was but that might have been no, it's the 90s.
You know, I'm getting confused with I'm getting George of the Jungle confused with Curious George. It's fine. Everything's fine.
It's fine. So I think you're right. There's like this adventure comedy thing, and I think this movie requires Mo be a bit more straight-laced,
a little bit more serious,
more serious, and I just wasn't getting that from Brendan Fraser. I thought Maggie's actor was decent enough. She's gone on to do more stuff. I looked her up. I thought the Risa plot with Risa losing her voice but being read out and not being able to find, that whole section felt very Princess Bride to me, where things were like conveniently in place and characters were just missing each other. Beautifully done, because you're like, fucking no, beautifully done, not well executed in this movie. But like you could see it was almost there. You're like, they're just missing each other, and some characters know but want their own things. Like the setup is there. I love at first I hated the author, and then I realized what they were going for with him, like as this sort of like professor who is, you know, lost in his own world.
My note on the author is just, I don't think there are any authors who are actually that chatty.
Yeah, it's true. I don't know. I'm an author, depending on what kind of author you mean. But I thought the epilogue is a bit dumb. And by that, I mean, once the shadow is defeated and Dustfinger is like, I'm going to leave. And Fareem is like, I'm going to go with you. And you can teach me the dragon's breath. And we get this whole sort of denouement for them. And then Mo and Maggie and Risa show up. And they're just like, yeah, I'll just read you back into the book. It's like, why did we need this scene then?
Yep.
Also,
it happens so differently in the books.
Yeah, I also don't need Fareem. I think that's his name, Fareem, at all.
Yeah, he had a huge part in the books.
I feel like he would, but he is not important to this story. He doesn't need to be there.
He also has a huge arc, and he's a part of Dustfinger's arc.
I felt like they were trying to allude to that. Like there's clearly sort of this like protege kind of thing where Dustfinger like winds up taking him on as this kind of
he ends up,
reluctant.
if I remember correctly, he ends up as like a juggler.
Yeah, he takes him on as this like reluctant character because he's very similar to Dustfinger, right? This sort of like he's a thief from the 40 Thieves, so he's like got this sort of cowardice thing going on, but still has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. Probably is a thief due to circumstance more than actual conscious decisions. Just had to make a living, and then wound up that way. That's very parallel to what I think is happening with Dustfinger. It's a really interesting idea. I don't think it goes anywhere.
Yeah.
Especially in this movie, but you could clearly see
they just wanted him to be in the movie because he was a beloved character in the book.
Yeah, and I could totally see he was my favorite character out of this whole thing.
Yeah, he was great.
And I would say like I really liked Maggie. I thought the actress who did Maggie does a great job. I thought her delivery was great. The problem is she just doesn't do much in this movie despite being the main character. It makes her feel very flat, which is why Fareem comes out as my favorite character when I could see myself falling in love with Maggie as a character. If I'd read the books or this movie was better made.
Since we're talking about favorite characters, I have to say Eleanor was amazing. She had a little redemption arc. Like, I love her.
That's hilarious.
Don't give me the thumbs down.
I'm giving Alyssa the thumbs down right now. That's hilarious because I found Eleanor superfluous and grating. Like,
I loved her.
When Capricorn is like, I have no need for a woman with a loud mouth, I was like, is this movie actually inadvertently sexist without meaning to be? Like, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because Maggie and Eleanor are both stereotypically treated like females in classic fantasy. Mm-hmm. They're sidelined. How much of this movie does Maggie spend in a prison or captured or something of that ilk? Or being left behind by her own father, right? And Eleanor disappears from the book for a while. I just feel like inadvertently this movie accidentally does a sexism because Eleanor is like sort of this like loudmouth like older female character who's like stubborn and stuck up and a bit snobby, and there's nothing wrong with that and nothing wrong with writing a character like that, but the way the movie treats her, not the other characters, but the way the movie treats both of them, I feel like is unfair. They're constantly sidelined. Risa literally loses her voice, right? Which affects the narrative because she can't speak out to get her children back. She can't tell Dustfinger. She can't, when they're crossing the dungeon window, she can't reach out to call them. She's literally lost her narrative voice. Mm-hmm. So I think in some ways it's like watching this movie was heartbreaking in the way that I was saying before, where you're like, oh, I just want the characters to meet and they're so close and they can't see each other and it's so perfectly written. And at the same time, I'm going, this is really fucked up because all the female characters are sidelined.
Yeah.
It's super frustrating.
Yep.
And none of them do anything cool. That's not true. Eleanor gets her little like motorcycle thing at the end and comes in.
Her little moped like goes flying in. That was my favorite part. And I was like, that's me. That's me.
That's just because you're an old lady at heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. So I'm really glad we watched this movie. I had never seen it before. I had never read the books, but I'm really glad we watched it because there's some excellent ideas in here of bringing books to life and it's clearly, like I said at the very outset of this episode, it's clearly a love letter to people who read and people who are writers and people who love and want to experience the stories on like another level and have them be read out loud to them, or even enter into the books, which is something that we totally did not explore in this movie, but is clearly in the original book, where like, imagine if you could enter into your favorite book series. Mm-hmm. Now that raises some other questions because people would be like, well, I would love to be in X series. And I'd be like, you, as you are now in Lord of the Rings, like you'd be a farmer. You have no skills that are applicable. You know what I mean? Yep. Like, so that raises
I'd be okay with that.
That raises some other questions. Yeah, but you're already an old lady and you have skills that are applicable. You could just be a seamstress, make clothing.
I could. That's right.
I would try to make my way as some kind of like philosopher or like
You could be a bard.
like a regent. I could be a bard. I'd have those skills, but like some kind of regent or like counsel to a like lower class prince or like lord, so as not to draw attention to myself, but clearly have like the education to like help them with social change, bring about some, you know, socialism instead of just feudal lordship.
Feudal lordship.
Talk about some
lame.
economics and Marxism. Anyway, I'm getting off
We're just
track
getting
here.
into like your typical isekais.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're getting off track here. Let's get into some pitches. How are you feeling about doing some pitching?
Mixed feelings. It's up to you. If you want to go first, or I can.
Are you
first.
having mixed feelings about doing pitches at all, or mixed feelings about your pitch?
No, just about my pitch, because I think that I have a really weak beginning, but a fairly okay ending. So
That's all right. Okay. Would you like to go first, or would you like me to go first?
You know what? I'll go first.
Do it.
Okay. So we basically start the entire like first, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes of the movie basically the same. There was a narrator, right?
I don't remember.
Someone who was like, and these people could do stuff, but they wouldn't know until it was too late. Just take that whole thing out. Like, whatever.
Just no.
No, just no. Yeah. So, we start off, you know, Mortimer is reading to Maggie, or Mo, whatever we want to call him, is reading to Maggie, and then we get, you know, things
Stuff
happen,
happens.
and then all
Plot.
of a sudden we like cut to Maggie sitting in the van, and she's reading something that's a little bit advanced for her age, but she's like obviously absorbed. She barely notices her dad when he gets into the driver's side, so they pull away from the gas station. They have a nice conversation about the book she's reading. And then they pull up to the bookshop, and the conversation kind of turns sour. Just same thing as what happened, where she's just like, why are we here? Like, you never tell me what book we're looking for. And you always look dejected and blah, 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 blah. Same thing happens. Mo finds the book he's looking for. Take out that weird whispering. Like, that was not
I didn't hate
in
the
the book.
whispering, but it doesn't really do anything for the movie.
And it wasn't in the book. The books don't whisper to the readers.
No,
like,
but it's an easy way to show in a visual medium to show that the books are like somehow hold power for Mo.
yeah.
And then we can do that later for Maggie. So I see why that might have been a good artistic decision.
But we already know that Mo holds the power just from the opening scene.
Exactly.
So, basically the same thing happens, and they end up going to Eleanor's house. I liked the touching moment between Eleanor and Maggie, where Maggie is like, oh, I know a lot about books, and I want to do what my dad does, but I also want to be an author. And then Eleanor is like, well, when you finish your first book, let me read it, or like something like that. Like something actually encouraging rather than just like, here, you can have this book. It was your mother's. Go read over there.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted Eleanor to be a little bit more soft, but at the same time still like
Clearly there's
But don't touch
a
anything.
softer
Yeah.
interior, but like a prickly outside.
Yeah. So, Maggie ends up, you know, still taking that same seat, reading through, you know, Eleanor had basically given her a stack of books that are like, these are the ones you're allowed to touch because your father is going to look at them later.
Yeah.
So she is like reading through. We can see her at like on her own time in a journal, writing out her own, like a book, by hand. And when she gets, like, she also is given the book that was her mother's. Why Wizard of Oz?
I think it's because it's a classic, and because the themes of the Wizard of Oz come up a couple times of being like carried away to another magical world, which is the point
True.
of reading, right? That you get
True.
carried to another world. So like I could see the parallels.
I guess, yeah, okay. I guess I'll leave it the same. I didn't really have any reason to not like to change it, but anyways. So she's already read through The Wizard of Oz before, but she notices that like some of the phrases are slightly different because, you know, there's different prints, or print runs that sometimes they get a little bit different, or the editions change.
Yep.
And she's reading some of these different things out loud. And we get basically the same kind of it's like a parallel to the very first scene where she's reading and she doesn't realize that she's reading things out of the book.
Yeah.
So something happens outside the window that she doesn't see. But her dad notices them. And, like, he's on his way down to stop her. And then notices that the house is surrounded. The three of them are rounded up and they're taken to Capricorn, who is watching Dustfinger perform because Dustfinger sold them out.
That bastard.
Yeah. So, we can basically see that, like, the first half of this is basically the same.
The same, yeah.
Where we see, I can't remember the other reader's name.
I think it's Roland.
Roland?
Roland?
Maybe?
Roland? Something like that.
Whatever his name was. He struggles to bring complete people into the world. And then he gets thrown in the dungeon after they bring Mo in. And Mo brings all that gold and Fareed in. Fareed or Fareed?
Fareem? I don't know. I feel bad that I didn't remember, but he's such a not important character.
I looked it up. I think it was Fareed.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically the whole thing is the same up until they use the Wizard of Oz. And, you know, there's no whispering. So like, I'm just, like, fully fast forwarding into the part where they're going to meet the author.
Yeah.
Because almost everything was the same except for little stuff with,
yeah.
You know, showing that Maggie wants to be a writer. And, yeah. And none of that weird whispering. So they go to meet the author. It's just Mo and Maggie that go while they leave Dustfinger and Fareed in the square. Eleanor has already gone off. She's got her ticket. She's on her way home. And they show him Dustfinger while he's performing. And the author is like, well, he doesn't want to talk to me, but I'm basically his dad. Like, I don't know. This is probably just a scam to get, you know, my original work from me. Yeah. And they're still trying to reason with the author, but he basically just slams the door in their face. So they go back to Dustfinger and Fareed, dejected, and Dustfinger's like, you know what? Fine, I'll go talk to him. So the four of them go in, and Dustfinger is like, okay, I don't want to know anything about my story, but I want to get back to it. And then he's, you know, the author basically does the same thing. Like, what, you don't want to know that you die or something like that? Or you don't know that you die? Yeah. And Dustfinger is just like,
you suck.
Everybody dies. It's fine. Just don't tell me how.
Yeah.
And then, so they get back, they get the manuscript. Dustfinger drops the bomb about Risa being alive and in the current world, but only to Mo. Maggie doesn't know.
Ooh.
And so Mo is kind of like, oh, we're going to drive away to put Dustfinger back into the book just in case it takes someone else or brings someone else back and they're dangerous. Like, he just wants to keep them safe. So it's the two of them. They're driving away. Maggie is left with the author, and Fareed is supposed to be with the author, but he snuck into the car as well. While Maggie is there, the author is like, I wonder if it's hereditary. You know, because he's an author. He's like, oh, this is really interesting. I wonder, like, could you read me something out? And she tries summoning Toto from her book, from her mother's book, which works. And then she's trying to get Toto to sit still so she can send him back. But that's when Capricorn's men have found them again. They bring Toto, the author, and Maggie back to the castle. So Dustfinger, Mo, and Fareed are trying to get into the castle when they notice a large group of men coming back, and they see Maggie in the car and immediately start coming up with a way to save both of them, because now there's Maggie and Risa. They split up. Dustfinger and Mo head out to find Risa. Fareed is in charge of finding and saving Maggie and the author, because they figure groups of 3 is a little bit easier than, you know, like a group of 4 and a group of 2 or something. Yeah. Capricorn forces Maggie to bring all sorts of stuff through from other books, but doesn't think too hard about anything else other than just being rich and having fun and being comfortable in this world. Because he's evil, but he's like not a brilliant, evil...
schemer.
Genius, schemer kind of guy. That's not his role in the books, right? So Maggie, in between readings, is recuperating. She's given tea with honey, and she's actually treated fairly well. and she comes up with the idea of sending Capricorn back to the book. The author is like, oh, but we don't have the book anymore. Your dad took the manuscript. And but Maggie's like, yeah, but you're literally like the author. Like, you created that book. Just write a new part of it. So he's like, well, I can't rewrite it because that would just be undoing stuff that's already been done. She's like, just add to it. Like, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, that's what Twitter's for.
You're not redoing it. Yeah. Just like write a, 3-page sequel, whatever.
Like I said, that's what Twitter's for. Anyway.
Yeah. So they brainstorm together to figure out ways to subtly write Capricorn and all of the men back into the book, back into their own books. And they're going to try 2 different things, and that is like to write the henchmen back into their own books, and if that doesn't work, to write them into Inkheart, because they are all from different books. And they're in the middle of writing something when Farid shows up. They fill him in on their plan and send him off to meet with Mo and Dustfinger again.
With Doe and Mustfinger.
That sounds gross.
Yeah.
So Maggie is like, okay, just like convene with us in a few days. Just be ready to leap in if anything happens. But I think it'll be fine. I think we'll be able to do this. And Farid agrees and runs off. But he only meets up with Mo because Dustfinger allowed himself to get caught. So Dustfinger's thrown into the dungeon. He gets filled in on the plan. And the 3 of them are very subtle about the whole thing. Trying to, they're like, the 3 of them are brainstorming and working together. Mo and Farid do their best to meet with Riza, who ends up basically telling them, through writing, that don't take me now because it'll raise suspicions. So I'm just going to be here and I'll be ready to kick ass when the time comes. So she's like, she's in on the plan and she knows how she can help. So the next day, this is supposed to take place over a couple days. The next day, they're all kind of ready to go. So Dustfinger frees himself and the author after they take Maggie up to meet Capricorn. Mo, Farid, and Riza are all, positioned at different vantage points where they can leap into action easily. Riza is like right in the center of everything, as, she's like a maid or a housekeeper or whatever. So she's bringing around drinks and food and whatever. She's doing what they would expect her to be doing. And where am I? And then unknowingly or surprisingly, Eleanor is on her way in through the forest, but she doesn't know anything about the plan. She's just like, I'm gonna see, I know that they went back, they had to, because what else are they gonna do with Capricorn? Yeah. Where am I? Yeah. So Capricorn hands Maggie the next book to read, and she actually she drops it by quote unquote accident. And when she picks it up again, she sneaks out a piece of paper from her boot. She begins reading from the book they gave her, but then switches to the newly written passage partway through. It takes a moment before Capricorn and his men notice what's happening, but once they do, it's like pandemonium. All of the members of, we'll call them the Maggie group, step in to keep them away from Maggie while she finishes reading. But as she's reading, whoever disappears into Inkheart takes whoever they're holding onto or whatever they're holding onto with them. Mm-hmm. So basically everyone disappears. Oh. And then in the last minute, the last member of the gang, or maybe it's Capricorn himself, I don't know, grabs onto Maggie and she disappears as well. Right as she finishes her final sentence. So they all find themselves in a different castle. Immediately, Riza grabs Maggie and runs with her. She's surprised to find that she has her voice back. The others try to dart away, but it's hard to tell who is who in the darkness, and as they go, Maggie looks behind to see Dustfinger lighting up the place. Mo, Capricorn, and the whole gang are all there. And then we cut to see Eleanor walking into the empty castle to find Toto, the author, and Dustfinger's weasel just kind of there,
it's a ferret.
What just happened? Yes. Ferret, yeah.
Good.
Cool.
Nice. So they're all in the book.
They're all in the book.
Nice. So are you setting up for a sequel, or did you just want to be like, fairy tales are great?
I am setting up a sequel, yeah.
Okay.
So the plan would be that the author and Eleanor are trying to like figure out the best way to write the story to make sure that they all survive, but then he's like, well, I already added too much on, it's already changed the story too much.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll work. And then somewhere along the line, the book that Maggie was writing, he finds it and he's like, oh, this is actually really good, maybe we can try something with this.
Oh, nice.
And then,
and meanwhile, all the other characters are like in the book.
In the book, and they're trying to get out.
That's cool. That's neat. I like that.
I also thought it'd be really interesting too if instead of going into Inkheart, if they actually found themselves in Maggie's book, because then she's the author, she can change things
whatever
as
she wants.
she's
So
going, right?
she
I
can
thought that'd be really cool. That's why I left it kind of ambiguous. If they're just in a different castle.
Yeah. That's an interesting
Because she
idea.
was helping write it, right?
Especially if she doesn't know, like if nobody knows that it's her book, like when the author tries to change his book, it doesn't help any of the characters inside the story until Maggie realizes that it's her book.
Yeah.
Or like her version of Inkheart. Wouldn't it be hilarious if it was like fanfic? It's like her
That would
fan
be
fiction
really
of
cool.
Inkheart. And not like weird fan fiction where characters get sexual with each other, but just like her. She's like, I just really liked the story, so I tried writing some side adventures, and then you're like, holy shit, it's like fan fiction of Inkheart, and that's why she didn't know that it was her book, but then she's like, oh, I wrote this, I'm the author, I can change anything. That's neat.
Yeah. So lots of cool ideas that could be played with for the sequel. But
Good. No, that's a good sequel setup. I like that. And especially because you've sort of like established characters and sort of stakes beforehand. So now you're like, okay, moving forward, what's that going to look like now that things have changed and we're in the book? My movie takes a very different turn in that it's much darker than the movie we got. I got rid of a lot of characters in very different ways because they were frustrating for me. And I also... I wanted to make sure that the magic system was like hard. There are hard rules that you have to follow being a silver tongue. Also, Inkheart itself is much more like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings in that it's very, very long-winded. He's also not as good as an author as Tolkien. So it's very, very long-winded, sort of magically superfluous with like long backstories, and we'll get into why. So the movie starts out with a narrator. So it's a woman explaining that books are a source of like endless wonder and adventure in a lot of ways. Even though books only let us read about magic and sorcery and spells, that in itself is a kind of magic, as the power of books can bring us to many different places and bring us closer to people that we previously didn't understand. Yay, empathy. This is the kind of magic that exists in books for most people, but there are some people that there is a second kind of magic. For some people, reading a book out loud can cause the book to come to life, and those people are called silver tongues. While this is happening, on screen we're introduced to Mo, Risa, and a young Maggie, and we can see Mo as he discovers the wonder of reading things to like for the amusement of his young daughter and wife. The narrator continues, but the magic of silver tongues comes at a cost, for the powerful magic of bringing words on page into reality must be counterbalanced when some kind of ominous shadow just off screen like appears and then the screen fades to black. So the narrator continues this story, she's like, this is the story of one silver tongue who found their destiny through the magic of reading. So we then open up 12 years later with Maggie, who's about 15 years old, and her father in a village, and her father manages to find a copy of a book. Meanwhile, Maggie is outside and is cornered by a strange man who calls himself Dustfinger. In my version, Dustfinger is more like 2021, and he basically just straight up tries to kidnap Maggie.
Okay.
So Mo shows up and is like, WTF, you're supposed to be a good guy. I said I wouldn't come after you. And Dustfinger is like, you don't understand. They sent me to get you, and Maggie is an easy way to get leverage. And Mo is like, you swore to me I would never see your face again. And Dustfinger is like, you don't understand. I have to do this. And if you don't listen to me, things will get really nasty. And Mo is like, you wouldn't dare. And Maggie watches in disbelief as Dustfinger conjures fire as if from nowhere and begins to try and surround them. Luckily, Mo seems to know exactly what he's doing, and we can get some like adventure hijinks where Maggie is like, I thought my dad was like a bookbinder, a scholar. This is nuts. Like, you're Indiana Jonesing our way out of this. But in the chase, they manage to escape, but the book that Mo had grabbed is like goes up in flames. Mm-hmm. In the car, Maggie is like, what the fuck was that? And Mo's like, for your safety, I'm going to leave you at your grandmother's while I go deal with this. And Maggie is like, that dude just magicked fire out of nowhere and you are not going to tell me? And instead of hiding like what's going on, Mo is like, okay, so there's these people called Silver Tongues and they can read things out loud in order to like bring these things to life. And Maggie is like, whoa, that's wonderful. And Mo's like, yeah, I thought so too. And so did Riza, until we realized there's a cost. When something comes out of a book, something of equal power must take its place. Mm-hmm. And so when Dustfinger came out of the book, Riza was put in. Yeah. And it's not just like anything. Yeah, it has to be someone who can fill the narrative requirements of the book. Whatever, it's not important. So one day while I was trying to read bigger and better things out of the book, I read Dustfinger out of the book. And when I went to go show Risa, she wasn't there anymore and realized she'd been placed into the book. So this book is not a popular, it's a book called Inkheart by this not very well known author from the middle of nowhere. So here Maggie is left with Eleanor at her estate, and Mo leaves to go find out what's happening. But when he's gone, some men attack the manor and break in and start trashing the library. Before they can get to Maggie, some fire erupts out of nowhere, and it defends Maggie. And Dustfinger shows up, and for some reason, he is now protecting Maggie. But when they retreat to the library, he's too afraid to like use his fire because he doesn't want to like light the books on fire. So unfortunately, he, Maggie, and Eleanor are captured. So as they all get hauled off to wherever it is they're going, Maggie thanks Dustfinger for saving her, but she's confused. He says, I don't want to hurt you. I needed to kidnap you, but I can't tell you why. And eventually the trio are brought to the castle that looks like it came right out of a fairy tale. And here we meet the villainous Capricorn, who used to serve as the leader of what I'm calling the Black Brigade, which is a group of servants that protect the Dark Prince. In the book Inkheart, and the only reason we know this is because Eleanor's like, well, I read the book. That's how she knows what's going on. She's like, I recognize you, and they're like, so what happens like next? And she's like, I don't know. I never finished the book. It was too long and dumb, which is my dig at Tolkien. And I like Tolkien as much as the next person, but it's kind of long and dumb. So all of this is explained by by Eleanor, and we can also see that after having saved Maggie's life, Maggie is like in awe of Dustfinger. She's like, this dude uses magic and saved my life. So she's like a bit infatuated. She's also 15. At first, Maggie is very angry at Capricorn, but he tells her that she doesn't know the whole story. You see, Dustfinger was the person that like Mo released when he lost Riza, and Maggie like is like, oh, that was you, like. I knew that. And Capricorn's like, yes, but Dustfinger refused to go back. And Maggie is like, but you could bring my mom back. And Capricorn is like, yeah, that ought to keep you busy in the dungeon while you guys talk that out. And Eleanor is like, well, you don't need Maggie. You have one of us. And you already know that like Mo is going to come save us. And Capricorn's like, oh yeah, that's right. And straight up just impales Eleanor. And he's like, wow, that'll save some space in the dungeon. So Dustfinger takes Maggie away, who's basically distraught over watching her grandmother get impaled. But Maggie's also angry with Dustfinger, so she doesn't want anything to do with him, but they're stuck in the dungeon together. Yep. In the dungeon, she asks why he didn't let her father bring her mother back, and Dustfinger explains. He's like, imagine finding out your whole life was a fabrication of another person. Like, everything you lived and worked for is just a lie. Someone else came up with you as a means of entertainment for other people, and you're doomed to whatever they say happens at the end. And he's like, well, I flipped to the like the page that I was in the book, and in the end I die, and that's not how I want to go out, so no, I'm not going back. And obviously Dustfinger in my version is still a coward. Like, he's written to be a coward, he's still a coward. And he's like, I'm not going back into the book to die because he's a coward. And Maggie is distraught because, you know, her mother took his place and she must die at the end because Dustfinger dies. So the night is cold in the dungeon, and Dustfinger conjures up a fire, and the pair sit side by side in order to get warmer. But Dustfinger explains, he's like, look, if anyone were to read a part of the book where Riza doesn't die, or I didn't die, then there's no reason why she wouldn't die in the story. You just read a different part of the book. And secondly, because Riza is not Dustfinger, despite the fact that they replaced each other in terms of being equal, it doesn't mean she'll make the same mistakes, which means she may not die at all. The story has changed. In fact, since living in the real world, I'm not the same anymore. I'm not sure I would make the same mistakes. So she asks him what he did, and he explains, like, I was written like a coward. I wound up, you know, leaving like a coward. I was written to basically double cross and lie, and I don't want to be like that. So he's like, but I grew up poor and without a family, and one day he heard that an old wizard was, like, you know, really old and decrepit, and I you know, crept my way in and I stole the old man's fire magic, but in the process I set the whole thing ablaze, and when the wizard was, like, in the blaze, I chose not to go back and save him, and the man died in the fire. And that's how he got his fire magic. But he's like, I don't want to be like that anymore. And Maggie sort of tentatively forgives Dustfinger. So this is when Mo shows up, and he's, like, there to save Dustfinger and Maggie, and he hands Maggie a book, or Dustfinger hands Mo the book in order to get them out, and he reads the storm scene from The Wizard of Oz. On the road, Mo explains that he thinks he might have been able to find, or he's found a book that can get Riza out. They just need to find someone to replace her in the story. And Mo is like, I'm going to read Dustfinger in because it's where you belong. And Dustfinger's like, hell no. And Maggie actually agrees. She's like, no, like, he's a real character. He's a real person now. He should be able to, like, do what he wants. And he shouldn't be imprisoned in a story just like Riza. We just have to find someone else. And Mo is like, okay, I don't really think there is somebody else and he belongs in the book. But he sort of is like, okay, and goes along with it, even though he doesn't really think that. So they go to the author's place and they find him, and that plays out the same with except without Farid. And we can also see that Maggie is infatuated with Dustfinger now, and Mo does not approve for several reasons and knows Dustfinger is, like, too old. And Dustfinger is like, I know I'm too old, and I don't. But he also is like, he likes that she admires him. Like, that she thinks he's a hero. It makes him feel better about himself. He also likes that she knows how to read because she's reading constantly. And he's like, yeah, I never learned how to read because I grew up poor. So when the author, Panolio, whatever his name is, meets Dustfinger, he's in awe. Like, he's like, silver tongues are real and you're just like I imagined you. And Dustfinger punches him and is like, you made me a liar and a thief and a beggar and I die in the end. You're an asshole. And the author's like, but it was a noble death for a coward character. And Dustfinger's like, I am never going to be a coward again. And you're just an insignificant fairy tale author with a shitty book nobody finished. And Mo starts to read, but instead, so Mo starts to read because they're like, we're going to put the author back in. And Mo starts, like, he wants to be in his own story. And Mo starts to read, but instead of putting the author in, he aims to put Dustfinger in to bring Riza out, and Maggie doesn't want that and is like, whoa, hang on, like, don't do that. And Dustfinger freaks out and sets the book on fire.
Okay.
And Maggie is mad because that's the lost copy they could find, like the manuscript, and it's been burnt up, and she's like, my mother is still in there, and, like, I know you didn't want to go back, but, like, and she's also furious with her father because she's like, this doesn't have to be like that's not how it works, right? You can't just put somebody in if they don't want to be in. So the group and the author, Dustfinger, Mo, and Maggie go to the local library. When this happens, they're taken over by a group. Like, all of them are captured right after the manuscript goes up. And this group takes them to the local library where they explain that they are a branch of the British Library known as the Bookkeepers. And their job is basically, they've known silver tongues were around, and they've been around for thousands of years. Their job is to stop silver tongues from changing stories, because stories are knowledge. And in the past, what silver tongues have done is actually changed stories by reading them aloud, including history, which means they can actually change what people are reading and bring history back to life, which is like really messed up in terms of propaganda and whatnot.
Yep.
So their job as the branch of the British Library known as the Bookkeepers is to stop them from doing that. So they're like, we basically are going to put Inkheart back to the way it was. It's supposed to be. So everything's going to go back in. Capricorn, all the Black Brigade. I also forgot to mention that Capricorn, it does have a silver tongue named Roland. That's all the same. And he's been reading Magical Beasts out, but Roland has a stutter. That's all the same. So the author is like, oh, Capricorn is alive? And everyone looks at him and he's like, nobody knows why that's important. And they're all like, no, because we never finished your book. And the author explains that at the end, Capricorn actually betrays the Dark Prince and reveals that he was working for the Shadow and is trying to bring this dark shadow to life. And if he's in the real world, he probably wants to do that again, because that's the way I wrote him. And he probably wants a silver tongue to do this. And everyone's like, oh, but his silver tongue doesn't bring people out fully, which means we can't... he probably doesn't want to risk having the shadow not come out. Also, Riza is never read out of the book. She's still stuck in the book.
Okay.
So Maggie also realizes that the bookkeepers must have another copy of Inkheart if they're able to do this, and that Capricorn must have a copy too. They've been monitoring it, and Dustfinger reveals, he's like, yes, they do have another copy. That's how they got me to work for them. I've been working for them. I was sent to steal you for them, but then I betrayed them by not kidnapping you. But the reason is because he doesn't want to go back into the book, and they threatened to have a Silver Tongue read Dustfinger back into the book unless they went and got Maggie and Mo. So they want to put everything back. So Mo and the bookkeepers go to Capricorn's castle and basically lock up Dustfinger and Maggie again, and they're in jail. And Maggie's like, well, we'll just read ourselves. We could just read ourselves out of it again if we could just bring things to life. But unfortunately, like, we don't have Mo here, so we can't like read anything out. And Maggie is like, I'm not so sure. So throughout the story, we've had inklings of her being Silver Tongue, and she goes to find the book, The Wizard of Oz, and wants to read the storm scene in order to get out again. Except they already read that out of the book, so it's not in the book anymore.
Oh.
So there's literally no more storm in The Wizard of Oz. And she's like, oh shit, this is really messed up, because like actually the bookkeepers were right. There's no storm in The Wizard of Oz. It's not The Wizard of Oz anymore. It's a very different story. And yeah. Dustfinger is like, well, that's not going to work. They're in separate cells this time. He's like, that's not going to work. He melts the chains and the bars that are keeping him inside and escapes. And Maggie is like, well, now we can get out of here. And Dustfinger's like, yeah, no, bye. And she calls him a coward as he like runs away. So Mo and the bookkeepers get to the castle, but Mo makes a deal. He's like, I want my wife back, and then I'll do what you want. So they agree. They capture Bassa, read him back into the book, and get Riza out. And she's exactly as Mo remembers, even though it's been like 12 years. She's exactly as Mo remembers. And he gets her up to speed, and they're stupid excited to see each other and be like, it's all great and wonderful, romance, yay. But the bookkeepers are like, okay, now we have to stop Capricorn. So Maggie move back to Maggie. She's still in the dungeon and alone. And she finds the book and she reads Toto out of the book, because I think that would be wonderful. And it's just really cute. Dustfinger does show up while she's like with Toto, and he's like, yeah, okay, fine. I don't want to be a coward anymore. Like, don't rub it in. And she's like, oh my God, you saved me. I could kiss you. And he's like, yeah, but don't, because that's weird and your dad would kill me. Anyway, but he's also happy that she's not calling him a coward anymore. Like, so he feels like he's like, I'm a good person. I can be. So at the castle, Maggie and Dustfinger show up, and Riza, and they all reunite, and it's happy, yay. And Mo even thanks Dustfinger for rescuing his daughter, but then they have the problem where now the bookkeepers are after them, like after Dustfinger and Mo, and Capricorn's Black Brigade are all after them. So Riza is held at knife point, because she's captured by Capricorn, and he's going to kill her unless he forces Mo to read the shadow out of the book. And he's like, yeah, but I can't read something that doesn't, like, if it's not equal power. I can't read the shadow out unless something of equal power goes in. And Capricorn's like, yeah, that's why I had all the other magical creatures read. Oh. So all of those magical creatures get sucked in, and wait, sorry, hold on. Oh no, never mind. I changed that. Sorry. So Capricorn knows that Dustfinger belongs in the book, and he's like, his fire magic should make him powerful enough that he could exchange for the shadow. So Mo is like, I'm going to read Dustfinger into the book. However, Maggie knows that the exchange won't work if it's not a fair one. Mm-hmm. So she's like, well, that's great. Like, I'll just jump in the way. But she's a silver tongue, so she gets sucked into the book, and the shadow comes out. It is an equal exchange because silver tongues are super powerful. And Mo is like, what happened? And Dustfinger's like, she's a silver tongue. That's why the exchange works. She didn't realize. And Mo's like, well, I can't read her out while Capricorn has Riza. So Dustfinger's like, I'll go save Riza. But Capricorn plays tricky, gives Riza up easily to Dustfinger, and then impales Mo, like kills Mo. And Mo is like dying, and he's like, look, Dustfinger, like Maggie clearly thought you were a good person. You have to do what you can to save her and use the strength that you have. And then Mo dies. And Dustfinger takes this to heart, and he finds the author who's cowering with Capricorn's silver tongue named Roland. And he's like, he asks the author, he's like, what's the shadow's weakness? And the author's like, well, it's a primordial magical creature, and starts going on this tangent about the lore of this character, very Tolkien-esque. And Dustfinger's like, get to the point. And he's like, well, it's darkness. Darkness, like the opposite is light and heat. And Dustfinger's like, oh, is that all? Well, I can cover that easily. And
That's literally Dustfinger.
Yeah, he starts conjuring all this magic, and he's fighting off the shadow. And like we can get this awesome battle of like shadow and fire magic. And eventually he defeats, like with this massive power of fire, he defeats the shadow. But there's no more silver tongues left to save Maggie except for Roland. But he isn't sure he can read her out by keeping her complete. And they need something of equal power to go in if they want to bring Maggie out.
Right.
And Risa asks, she's like, well, you just defeated the shadow, which means you're clearly at least as powerful as the shadow. Would you go back into the book to get Maggie out? And now showing his full arc, Dustfinger goes, yes, I will go back into the book, even though I don't want to. I will go back into the book to get Maggie out. So Roland then reads Dustfinger into the book while Maggie comes out, and we get a brief moment while they're both fading in and out where they smile at each other until Maggie is in the real world and Dustfinger's in the book. But because Roland has a stutter, Maggie isn't completely intact. In fact, she left her memory in the book, so she has no idea of Dustfinger or anything that just happened.
Okay.
5 years later, we see Riza telling a story of what happened to Maggie. She's the narrator. Riza's the narrator. And Maggie's listening, and we realize that like this is Riza telling the story to Maggie to help her remember. And then at the very last line, Maggie finishes it for her mother, signaling that she's remembered everything.
Yeah.
So we then see Maggie visit the author, who is delighted to see her, and they sit quietly for a while, and eventually she's like, I remember everything, that's why I came to see you. And he's like, have you tried reading something to life? And she's like, no. And he's like, I wonder if you would try reading for me. And she's like, I don't think that's a good idea, and I don't want to bring anything to life. And she's like, how about reading someone into the story, my story, because I'm the author. And she's like, if you're the author, that means you have like as much power in there as like a god, which means I could bring anyone out. And he's like, now you're thinking. And so she reads the author into the story in order to bring Dustfinger out. But because people don't age, he's still 20 and Maggie is 5 years older than she was. So the implication being, it's heavily implied that they could be together.
Yeah.
But I want to leave it up to interpretation. But the implication is like she's now 20 and he's 21, so they could be together. But that's the end.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, I was trying to go for I almost went super meta with this and did something like adaptation. I don't know if you've seen the book adaptation with Nicolas Cage, but it's about him trying to change a story while writing like an adaptation, and at one point in time he writes himself into the story. So I was actually gonna like get really meta with it and be like, there's the author of Inkheart, and then there's me, Andrew de Janglez, as the author of this adaptation of Inkheart, and put myself in the story. But I was like, that might be a little too self-indulgent.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's the point of this kind of like reading of Inkheart. The reading of the story is the magic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, enough with the meta-ness. What did you think? Any last minute thoughts about Inkheart?
No, just that everyone needs to go read the books because the books were like 1,000 times better.
Yeah, clearly. This movie has some good ideas, but did not pan. Where can people find you?
You can find me at twitch.tv/AlyssaLou with 3 O's.
You can find our band Robot Philosopher anywhere you listen to great music. You can also check out our other channel, the CineMasters, for awesome scripted content. And please feel free to stick around and watch more episodes or classic episodes or new episodes that are coming out all the time on this channel. And thanks for hanging out with us.
Bye.